It gets no better than this. Bob Powell, my friend, my colleague for almost a decade now, I want to say, Bob, is the most decorated, recognized financial journalist out there. He's the editor of Retirement Daily on TheStreet.com, and he started a new podcast on Yahoo Finance with what, 6 trillion views a day or something like that, Bob.
You
I,
know,
I,
100
welcome back, Bob
million,
Powell. Thanks, Bob,
right?
for joining.
Oh, thank you, Jay. It's 100 million visitors a month or so, Jay, apparently.
That's
And
just
and
wild.
and their lead anchor, Brian Sazi, has over 1 billion views just on his videos. It's insane.
You'll get there soon, Bob. You'll
Yeah,
get there soon.
I aspire to that, yes.
If I go on the site and I want to talk to you about that. So how long has retire decoding retirement, right? Is the proper name?
Yep. So we began in earnest last September as a pilot, and we've been airing one vodcast is what they actually call them, Jay, because they're both video and
Sure.
audio, one a week ever since. And I think we're over 35 episodes now. We've had people, many of whom you know, like David Blanchett and Michael Finca and Wade Pfau and Olivia Mitchell just came on. And I just spoke with Bill Bengen this past week. We published him yesterday, as we're speaking, we published him and his new 4.7% withdrawal rule. So we've had some great guests. You will join me on that shortly, I hope.
Look
Uh,
forward to that.
yeah, and the goal, ultimately is to provide people with the insights of the leading retirement subject matter experts and to get it to learn it straight from their mouths. We had Fritz Gilbert on, Jay, who I'm not sure if you know him or not. He writes the Retirement Manifesto blog. He wrote the Keys to a Successful Retirement.
I've
And
seen it.
yeah, and he was a great guest, and we're getting questions from viewers about his appearance, and there was a question that came in from someone who had lost his job late in life, and he's wondering whether he should pack it in or whether he should keep looking for a job. And I wrote to Fritz and I said, let's do a video where we can answer this gentleman's question. And he said, this is a tough one, whether,
Right.
late in life, whether you should, pack it in or keep trying. And I don't have an easy answer for it either, because I know people who have late in life been let go of a job and they've been trying for over a year to find something
Oh
and
yeah.
to no avail. So, it's not easy to be ageism exists and but people really need to in that position fully understand whether they have enough to, right, to fund their desired standard of living, not just for 30 years, but JP Morgan will tell you now 35 years.
Sure. Sure. It's crazy, because of the ageism that you mentioned, and then on top of that, which I think we can safely say is white collar recession, which is the advent of AI, obviously, right? Doing a lot of work that people would have been quite expensive as an employee at these big companies with all the benefits it costs and, possible other financial liabilities, out there, matching 401ks, et cetera, and then trying to, as opposed to downsizing at that expensive cost. And now you're sitting in the middle. I tell persons who are in professional lives, if they face turmoil, try to get a landing spot if you think that, your job is at risk. And then if it's not, if you are really having to deal with it, then, think about a longer time frame until you're able to be, unemployed for like, 2 weeks and then get to your next spot. I don't think that, this is that environment. And so now your questions every year you're older to try to think about that and said whether or not, and that can be a contracting job or whatever it might be and that type of thing. But back to your question and the question that you're getting on the, from your podcast. I'll just call it podcast because I can't
Yep.
pronounce the other words. So, so do you think that as far as you can see, and you've got the metrics there, are we, I always wonder, do you think that we are reaching people, enough people, a wide variety, enough people, kind of the people who actually need the information or lack the information effectively?
I think, Jay, the short answer is no. And I think, and I say that partly based on, I'll quote some research from the Employee Benefit Research Institute that suggests that only roughly 20 to 25% of people are very confident that they'll be able to retire to the same lifestyle that they had while they were working. So that leaves you with 75% of people either somewhat confident or not at all confident about being able to retire successfully. So we still have work to do there, I think. If not, I would love to see a world in which 80% of people are very confident. And I think the answer partly is, we've made money a little inaccessible, right? It's hard. Let's say you leave your employer and you have an old 401k there. It's truly hard to
Yeah,
move it from your old employer to either your new employer or into an IRA.
sure.
And I can give you two examples. One is my wife. She has a 401k with a former employer, and her advisor tells her you should move it to your new employer. And we're still
Right.
waiting to do that. And then, I have I shouldn't even name names at this point because they may watch it, but I have a dear friend who has maybe multiple old 401ks
Sure.
employers and says to me, it's it's just too overwhelming. I know I should do it, but I don't. And that's just like a really simple and easy task, quite frankly, right? I fill out a
Yeah.
form that says I'm making a trustee to trustee transfer, and I send the form into my, my new employer or my new brokerage account or wherever the case may be, and it's done. That's one thing. Then throw in the possibility that we overwhelm people with complexity and contradictions.
On the 401k transfer, these kinds of, so my question about your EBRI findings are kind of, my follow-up question whenever I see those kind of results is the uncertainty, is it coming from the idea that they're not sure what the future is, or they're not equipped with the tools to even understand how to think about what the future looks like? You see what I'm saying? I mean, they're
Yeah.
slightly different.
Yeah. I think, if I think back to the most common question that a financial advisor gets from someone who's on like retirement's doorstep is, do I have enough? Right? They don't know, right? Because they don't know how much retirement will cost, or they haven't figured out how much income they're going to get, or they haven't ballparked what their planning horizon will be.
Mhm.
Right? So there needs to be some work on their part to do this. And can you do it yourself? Sure. Can you do it better with the help of an advisor? Most definitely. And it doesn't mean that you have to retain the advisor. Maybe there's an advisor who will be your sounding board, who will
Sure.
just do the plan to say, yes, you do have enough to retire now, because that's ultimately what people need to know is, do I have enough? And in the absence of that answer, sure, 75% of people will be less than very confident that they can maintain their standard of living in retirement. I think that's it for me.
When I saw your podcast and I watched a few of the videos over the last few days, one of the entries was about younger generations.
Mhm.
And for me, I was thinking to myself, and I question myself all the time on this specific thing, even about my book, for example, Maximize Your Medicare, which is how do we reach the generations prior? Right, because it's kind of like you started this conversation with, okay, talk about EBRI and retirement and people approaching retirement and ageism, which is really for, Gen X, if you will, plus. But my question is, and I also about especially given your new platform, Yahoo being just everywhere.
Yep.
Can we get to millennial, Gen Z, I guess I don't even know, Gen Z to even get the ball rolling, right? Because now interest rates are no longer zero, right? I mean,
Yep.
in other words, saving now for a 25-year-old, 28-year-old actually matters now, right? I mean, before savings rate was zero in a bank. Now, a savings account, it can be 4 low 4%. Compounded now is a real number. Yahoo has one of the ways to get there. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, first of all, people have to sort of, take an interest in it. And, I often use
That's
my
fair.
children as my best example. And one of my sons is all in on saving for retirement to the point where he will challenge sort of some of the rules of thumb. We'll debate, for instance, Jay, this question. Is it better for me, given my salary, to contribute to my traditional 401k and get a lower tax rate, lower taxable income today? Or is it better to invest in a Roth IRA, a Roth 401k, and be taxed at a higher rate now, but not be taxed later? And one of the questions that he posed, you might enjoy this question, Jay, is let's assume I choose the path of saving in a traditional 401k and I take the tax savings and I invest that to pay for the future tax bill I'll have when I retire, when I have to pay ordinary income taxes on that traditional 401k. Now, that's a deep question, right? And it's a
That's
question.
a deep question, right?
But he's taken an interest in it, and
Sure.
he's read Michael Finke's book on saving for retirement. He's in the camp that I'm not going to use a target date fund. He's in his 20s. I'm not going to use a target date fund because they're expensive, and I can do this easily by just putting 80% in an S&P 500 index fund and the rest in a AGG, bond index ETF, let's say.
Sure.
On the other hand, so he's all in, right? He's a student of the subject,
That's extreme, right?
right?
To be fair about that's
That
pretty
that all
extreme.
right. I'm going to give the other extreme. Now, my daughter, despite us, growing up in a house where we talked about money, where she took a personal finance course in
Right.
in high school, where she was a business major in college, is just mildly interested in this. But she goes to a seminar, lunchbox session at her employer, where there are two people speaking. One is Mrs. Dow Jones, right? One of the more famous finfluencers on
Yep.
Instagram and TikTok, and Caleb Silver, who's the editor of Investopedia. And it's at that point where she makes the connection between what she's investing in her 401k and what she's doing, right? It took that personal connection with a finfluencer ultimately to sort of inspire her to think more about her 401k and how she's saving and investing. And
Is that the path? I mean, so much of the information, I've learned more about Boston in the last month. I've actually spent time in Boston. You know, from TikTok than anything. But like I said, millennials and Gen Z, for example,
yep,
is it TikTok? There's a word, right? Finfluencer or something.
influencer. Yeah, I think for some that's the path because that's how you make a connection, right? We now the challenge, of course, is people will say it's really hard to distinguish the good from the bad
Yeah.
influencers, and I think and it is a challenge. But I would say if you're going to use TikTok as your source of information, check around. Mrs. Dow Jones, fine. Humphrey Yang, fine. But there may be others, many others who I don't know who may be less than fine, who are giving you bad advice. So I think maybe again, this is a case where you find a sounding board, right? And double check. Again, right? Don't accept wholesale someone's advice from TikTok, but double check it somehow.
It's just wild. I mean, because I struggle with this all the time. I mean, to be candid with you, like for example, this happened this past week. A parent passed away, and the adult children took the ball and said, "I need to help my mother." They don't know, and now all of a sudden, the very first statement I had to the sons was, "Thank you for reaching out and intervening here."
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
now, because that allowed me the entry point of,
yeah,
here's the list of things. And since you've never really been anointed with, any of this, language and terminology, etc., you get a blank slate.
yeah,
And so you don't have bias. You don't get, You don't have you don't have the influence of the wrong information or incomplete information, and then you can just decide for your mother, all is one, and now we're in a good place.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking to myself, and that this when I think about, when we talk for thestreet.com and, Retirement Daily and the other locations that you're so good to share our, interviews, is are we reaching as many people as we possibly can? And are these people also thinking about, hey, my sister is facing this. I should tell my sister. We don't, uh, and this just still remains the open question to me. And just wanted to, discuss with you how you found, because you're out there everywhere, right? I mean, you're to the
Yeah.
professional market, you know,
Yeah.
for those people who don't know, Bob, well in the years before we knew each other, Wall Street Journal, Market Watch, the list goes on and on and on about all the locations that his articles have appeared. But now Yahoo Finance different, really, right? FinStream different, right? The aiming, the demographic being aimed. I'm just asking you about the effectiveness of it.
Yeah. I think ultimately, right, it's that notion of you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make them drink it. So we've got you, regardless of how effective or ineffective, we can't stop doing it, right? Because I think I'm often reminded, Jay, like my favorite story is about the starfish story. Maybe I've said this before in a previous discussion with you or not. Have I?
Right. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
No,
Sure.
I'm not gonna. I mean, it's the storm washes hundreds of thousands of starfish up on an ocean, and there's a little boy picking up a starfish one at a time and throwing it back into the ocean to save it. And along comes a man and says, "What are you doing? You can't possibly save them all." And he picks up one starfish and throws it back into the ocean. He says, "Well, I just saved that one." And so I think some of this is this notion of I'm saving one starfish at a time, and it's the starfish who's come to us who has a mild interest in going from street level to curbside to maybe advisor's doorstep, such that maybe their eyes don't glaze over when I mention the phrase or you mention the phrase income related monthly adjustment amount, right?
Right.
And I think that's the best we can do is to, save one starfish at a time. I will say that I think there's one bit of good news as I think about this. I just wrote a column for Market Watch. It hasn't been published yet as we speak, but it looked at cutting edge features of 401k plans. And there's a couple things going on that I think are interesting, where there's an evolution of financial wellness programs being offered in the workplace, and the
Right.
degree to which, if you're an employee, you ought to be taking advantage of these wellness programs. And then, in addition, what's going on is some firms are actually providing one-on-one financial advice to the 401k plan participant, either remotely or in person.
Hmm.
And what they're doing is not necessarily talking only about investing. They're talking about how to manage a budget, how to manage your credit score, how to pay down your student loan debt. And so if more and more people, employees, take advantage of what's being offered in the workplace, I think we can build a solid foundation from which people can then figure out how much I should save and invest for retirement. And I think, to that end, it doesn't have to be difficult, right? T. Rowe Price, Fidelity, and others have given young people benchmarks to shoot for, right? They'll tell people, oh, you should have one times your salary set aside at age 30, or two times set aside at 40, or 10 times set aside at age 65 when you retire. So, you can use these benchmarks, these heuristics in a way to at least, get a ballpark sense of whether you're on track or not. It doesn't require a PhD to do that,
No.
right?
Right.
But it might take a PhD and an advisor to help you sort through whether you should use a registered index linked annuity in your retirement plan, or whether you should use a buffered ETF in your investment portfolio. Those are a little bit more difficult, but certainly rules of thumb can get you, at least, like I said, from street level to curbside.
How are you balancing for your, and I always wonder this because you talk about a lot of different topics with a lot of different people.
Yeah.
Um, how do you walk the line between, okay, getting too deep in the weeds in terms of who your target audience, and
Yeah.
this I should have not even be recorded, right? Because you're just like,
No, it's okay. It's a fine line, and I'll give you a couple examples. It sort of depends on the media outlet. So, years ago, I was writing for USA Today, and they gave me a
right,
word count limit of like 650, 700 words. You can't do right by anyone
yeah,
in
yeah,
700 words, and it was a
right,
really frustrating experience. On the other hand, I thought, well, it's an opportunity at least to expose someone to a topic, which might be I don't know. How do I, how do I name beneficiaries on my IRA or life insurance policy? And maybe you get again surface, right? The surface deep, but not not miles deep. Other cases, I'll write for Market Watch, and sometimes I'll turn in a 2,000 word story to them, and they'll be like, this is a bit chewy, but we think it's an important topic. And so we're going to run it, but we prefer something a little bit shorter. And I always use as my benchmark, Jay, have I done right by the reader? Have I given them enough information so that they don't have to go elsewhere for something else? Like that I did right by them in the sense that it's pretty well covered, right? Maybe it's pros and cons, it's who this is aimed at, it's where you can go to get some extra help. And I feel like if I've done that, whether it's 500 words or 1,500 words, then I feel good about what I've written. Um, it's
hmm,
it's not always easy, Jay, I have to say, right? Because you have to like there's more you could write, obviously, right? I mean, I'm sitting here with look, here's Wade Fowle's book, right?
yeah, right. I have this book.
Right, 500 pages. He did right by his reader, but I can't do that in a Market Watch column or even something I've written. I'm in the process of writing something for AARP, which is 5,000 words on how to buy a vacation home when you're retired. That's a lot of words, but it's comprehensive, right? So we'll do right by the reader, I think, in that regard.
So how are you, and maybe journalism as a whole? My question being now, then, of course, ChatGPT has intervened,
Mhm.
as well as incredible new tools allowing deep research now, most recently.
Yeah. So,
Challenges to
yeah.
challenges, first of all, to you, meaning as financial journalists. Have you used, as far as you can see, the answers correct, not correct? What's your perspective on it?
Yeah, so you're well familiar. We may have talked about this in the past, where I started a series at Retirement Daily on the Street called Man versus Machine, where we ask Chat or Perplexity or Gemini or one of them, um, Claude, a personal finance question, and then we ask the subject matter expert to critique the answer. And more often than not, it gets some stuff right, some stuff wrong, and then there are some serious material omissions. So, to my way of thinking, AI is not yet there in a place where you could trust it, say, in the same way you might trust WebMD, maybe, right? If you trust WebMD. I don't know if you do or not. But but it's getting there and it's getting better, but it's not there yet. Um, I do think it's a great place to start if you're sort of at ground zero, and even for some who are more sophisticated, it's a great place to test some things. And I'll give you an example. One of my friends used one of the AI bots, I don't know which one,
Hmm.
to come up with a schedule for Roth IRA conversions given their current income, their projected income, their IRA account balances, et cetera, current tax rates, blah, blah, blah. And it came up with a 10-year schedule of how much they should convert and when so that they could stay under the 22 or 24% tax bracket. Now, was it accurate? I don't know. I didn't run the numbers myself, but I think imagine a world in which you say, I want to do Roth conversions. I have a financial advisor. I asked
Right.
ChatGPT to do this, and I take this spreadsheet to the advisor and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing Roth IRA conversions. Give this a look, see. Tell me if it's accurate. Tell me if you would recommend something different. But now I've come in with some research of my own that can at
Yeah.
least maybe jumpstart a conversation around what I should be doing with my money. So I think if you use it in a closed system, I think it works fine at the moment. But in terms of open-ended stuff, I might be a little less inclined to rely on it.
That example that you just mentioned is fascinating because I do think that, machines can do this certain things better than humans. I don't think we're that far away, as most things, when it comes to expectations of when the next development is going to appear, it always appears in advance.
Hmm.
Right. In other words, I think the next prodigy is going to be only 20 years old. Well, it's an 18-year-old who shows up and does that. You see what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
just a little bit sooner. I don't think we're that far because if you think about, for example, tax loss harvesting,
Hmm.
why can't I have machine run ETF do the tax loss harvesting following a particular mandate inside the ETF? I just simply don't think that we're that far away from it.
Yeah.
Getting away from some of the complications of mutual fund accounting, for example,
Yeah.
for non-qualified accounts. I mean, I think there are certain technical matters that can, like you pointed out, a closed form question, fed correct parameters, fed the correct question can create solutions better than humans. I don't think that that is candidly up for debate, right? I mean, yeah, I saw yesterday, I was, flipping through YouTube yesterday, Magnus Carlsen, world chess champion.
Yeah.
He said he doesn't play against the machines because he'll feel too dumb.
Yeah.
Which is all sorts of like crazy because he's like, yeah, humans make errors at certain points. Machine will not make this blunder. They will
Yeah.
not feel the emotion of the moment. They just will not blunder.
Yeah.
And I barely know how the chess pieces move, right? So, I can't even imagine, except for watching by fascination. I'm not sure if you've ever seen this, but chess is like one of these situations where it is a closed form question, right?
Yeah.
The variables are moving around, but it's still closed form. There's still like a
Yeah.
finite number of squares and finite
Yeah.
number of pieces. And you've got these engines and evaluation bar moving up and down during the play. And you've got other grandmasters speculating, well, if I move to here, and then they then take the response because they've given up. They've given up the human, they've given up the idea of I can't beat the machine in this calculation of a closed form question.
Yeah.
Now you've got this exercise. And then there's the human element, like you pointed out. I think that that also to some degree can be fed, right? Meaning that, for example, in your Roth question, well, here's my situation, but I am the very aggressive, but I am the very, conservative. And now you get a slightly different tweak to the schedule or plan. I don't think that we're that far away, to be candid with you, to some degree. I mean, meaning an everyday person can at least then have the framework, which is different than executing. Don't, I always tell people, I'm like, having a plan, having a framework of understanding is one thing, then executing is a totally different. And
Yeah.
then executing at the razor's edge, yet another level.
Yeah.
But I think that AI and these tools, but as far as you're thinking, from what I can hear, you're getting the answers and maybe the frameworks, but not the specifics quite right yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think just use the Roth IRA conversion question for a second. Let's say, for instance, because so much of it depends on the prompt. Let's say the person didn't enter their age, and all of a sudden they're
Yeah.
doing Roth conversions that impact their Medicare Part B and D premium, which is something that you would have picked up, but maybe
Sure.
because the machine didn't know about it or didn't factor it in or didn't ask how old you are, it gets lost in the fray. And all of a sudden, someone, if they decide to use this without the help of a professional, they're making decisions that, have right downstream consequences that they didn't even contemplate. Right. And I think that's something where, again, like if I don't know the right question, and I don't have a human to sort of back up this table, well, then, it's really not in my best interest to follow it, I think, right? Or because I don't know the negative consequences that could occur. That's where I think, again, right, a good place to start. Like I can tell you this. I went to I had a some sort of diagnostic test, and I got the results back, and I ran the results through AI. And then I wrote to my physician and said, "Hey, AI said I should be worried about this if this happens." And they were like, "You're fine. In fact, you don't even have to do the test like for years. We can wait 5 years before we do this test again." But had I relied on I would have been on like anti-anxiety medication because it put me in a downward spiral, right? Because it would
Right.
have me thinking I was on, my deathbed.
I'm sure if there's any viewers or listeners who are physicians, they will immediately eye roll because I'm sure that has happened an infinite number of times.
Right. Right.
Before AI, right? I was like,
Right.
Dr. Google told me that, I need to like make funeral arrangements now.
All right. But one quick note. You mentioned our famous chess player who, if memory serves, was banned from playing in one of the chess tournaments for cheating. And I would say that maybe he doesn't want to play AI because he can't cheat against it either.
There's what happened is this was a couple of years ago that he walked out because he
Yeah.
thought what he was being cheated on
Right. Okay.
by a challenger.
Right. 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 Yeah. That's right.
And
I'm
and
sorry.
when facing that person, so this was Magnus Carlsen and Hans Niemann, I think is the name of
Yeah.
the guy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's right. I got
Who
the
was
name.
the accused, and not
Apologize.
no defamation of either two because I think that there's no real actual evidence. So anyway, you know,
Yeah.
not to be resolved,
They've
but
both been allowed back on chess.com, if I'm not mistaken. Though
right.
I learned more recently, you better dress appropriately to play in a chess.
You learn all sorts of it's like crazy. So, what you were saying about the prompting, if you had to be then 30-year-old Bob and was it finance or journalism? And now you put yourself in the time capsule and now you're 30, you've got these tools. Is this the path or you just go to direct to TikTok and start hitting record?
I think I think TikTok would be the way to reach the masses, I think. Um, if you think about it, platforms, Market Watch, millions of people view it, Yahoo, millions of people view it. Um, but it's hard to go viral there, I think. And the
Yeah.
opportunity to go viral, I think about Humphrey Yang. And I don't know if you follow him or not, but early on when I did, I thought, well, this is pretty basic, simple stuff. He's describing what a dividend is, or what a stock buyback is, or what a earnings per share is. Pretty basic stuff. I could have done that as a 30-year-old easily and taking advantage of the platform to help educate people in ways that made it accessible, right? So I think that's the route that you would go. And I sometimes think it's still a route I would go. I just don't know how, right? I don't know how to break through and create a lane that's different from what Humphrey Yang has done, perhaps. Maybe it's retirement only. Maybe it's describing what an RMD is, or maybe, with your help, we can describe what income related monthly adjustment amount is. So there may be an opportunity still to do that, but 30-year old Bob would definitely take advantage of that platform.
What about Yahoo? What about yourself then having influencer tell your story? Something like that. And I'm just spitballing here because, I have everything that we've talked about so far presumes the person knows the right question to ask. And a long time ago, when I first came out, the very first time that I created a draft
Yeah.
to maximize your Medicare, my mother said to me, who was, a pharmacist in Korea. She was educated as a pharmacist. And so she says, some people describe you as some like crazy person that knows all this stuff. And I'm like, strictly speaking, Mom, you are far better educated on math and science than I, would ever
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah.
And, but she said, and spouse of a physician at home, right? My late father, a medical doctor,
Yep.
said, "You comes to Medicare, the problem is I don't even know where to start to ask."
Yeah.
It doesn't occur to her, didn't occur, and I'm just looking at her going, "You've been, I've been sitting here at this dinner table since childhood, and all I hear is, something about this or some complaint about Medicaid or some complaint about like insurance company." I'm like, "Did I still get my money for Slurpees, right?" Is what
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking to myself.
Yeah.
But but the thing is that she doesn't know where to start to ask.
Yeah.
And when I bring up this point to some newcomer, they're like, "Yeah, yeah, we don't know where to start to ask." And it's almost as if they don't know it's a topic,
Yeah.
like at all. So as a result, how can you get them interested? And not because, like I said, everything that you've discussed, your son, for example,
Yep.
the topics of the writers to your website, to
Hmm.
your vlog, video, podcast, that presumes interest to start.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now the question, or that it's even an issue. And I wish we could, on my wish list, the things that I wish for is some kind of other avenue where we're talking about some other topic which grabs the domain. And then, oh, at the end, almost as like the outro. Oh, yeah, you're clipping coupons for 50 cents, that come in the mail for a Subway sandwich, for 5.99, yet you totally disregard $700 a month of extra, home and of homeowners insurance because you didn't want to check around or
Yeah.
something like that. Something like that, where they don't know, but you just raise it to them kind of like in an offhand way as almost like a byproduct to the main line of what, we just talked about Boston talk. And then all of a sudden, oh yeah, by the way, in Boston, these are the different rates or something
Yeah.
like that. And that's your
Yeah.
outro.
You
Um,
know, I don't know. I mean, like people, on the one hand, people love hacks, right? Jay, they love hacks, don't they? I mean, at least I do. And I think maybe
oh,
we can give them some, life hacks that are around their money, and maybe that's way to get them in. Right? I mean,
that is not bad. That is not bad. We should definitely think because we've seen other persons that are experienced, and I'm not sure how much you've, explored on TikTok and, YouTube Shorts, Reels, things like that. And let's leave Reels and
yep,
YouTube Shorts to the side. But we've seen the other, prominent financial people making TikTok material that I hasn't resonated, I don't think. And I think as a result, kind of have like thrown up their hands. Right.
hmm,
In other words, they try to put their CNBC talk onto TikTok. It doesn't work.
yeah,
You see what I mean? Because
yeah,
much less than draw in the person who doesn't know what to ask.
hmm.
So now we're sitting there having this open question. I just don't, and we're struggling. We're struggling here in full view of the public because of the fact that this just becomes a challenge. And this is why I tell people when they approach us here, I can make tons of videos with Bob Powell on the street.com. Guess what? They don't add up to diddly squat compared to you just tapping them saying, "Here's Jay's email. Call it. Send him
Yeah,
an email."
I
Now,
know.
now they're all ears.
Yeah. I think so. Here's a recent example that just happened in the mail. I got a letter from our auto insurance company where they reviewed our coverage and said you have enough this and you have enough that and you have enough this. We don't know if you have umbrella insurance, and if you don't, you should get some, right? And
Mm.
and that obviously they don't know that I have umbrella insurance because I don't have it through that carrier. On the other hand, I thought, well, that was a pretty good little hack. If in a way,
Mm.
if I didn't have umbrella insurance, it certainly raised the notion that I ought to get it, right? Because they did their job. right? They reviewed my policy and gave me some a peace of mind that I have in place what I need, and then identified, some things that I might need that they didn't spot in my policy.
And maybe that's our outro on the Street Doctor on Retirement Daily when we talk.
Yeah,
That, just as the last, saying that we have that phrase thrown
yep,
in.
yep.
We have time about, for me to sneak in a phrase here or there on this kind of thing.
Well, so that raises an interesting point. When we created Decoding Retirement, Jay, was this notion that when I say a word, uh, it creates this fog, right? Like immediately, I can't penetrate what you're talking about because you're speaking in a language that is just it's not my daily language. So the goal would be to sort of, decode things in a way that makes them accessible so that people are just that much less afraid of the term, right? I mean, if I just have a little bit of walking around knowledge, maybe that can help me sort of like penetrate the what seems the impenetrable.
It's it's so tough, and that's just kind of, we're going a bit in a circle, I realize, but I wanted the people to get a feel for how complicated, and why Bob and I have gotten along so well over the years, probably, right? And we can end with this. Tell me the back, just to give people an idea. How do you even remember how we first? I just thought about just before before we started the session. Well, you
Test,
sent me an email. Is
test,
that what it was? You saw my book and you sent me an email. You had my book and you sent me an email. So something like that, right?
something like that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think so. Two things, Jay, right? Like, I think for me, right, partly I eat, breathe, sleep this topic, right, and I love it, right, because I find it to be ever changing, ever fascinating, ever and that my role, like people are always saying, like, how do you find what to write about? And I always say, I'm never at a loss to figure out what to write about. It's really a matter of choosing from all those things what to write.
Mm,
It's not like I'm hunting and pecking for something day by day. There's 10 or 12 things I could write about on any given day.
sure.
Anyway, when your book comes into my office, I'm like, this is a topic that I know people care about, and I know you're a credible source, and the book is credible, and it's really helpful to people, and we need to share that with our viewers because, among other things, I mean, Social Security is a little different. Jay,
Yep.
Medicare is like I think about for Social Security, we used to get the same question every year, but from a different person, right? And
Yeah.
and and it was always the same question from a different person because that person needed just-in-time information. And I think the same is true with Medicare. Now, and now it's an annual thing where I need just-in-time information because I don't need to. I mean, I ultimately I need to re-enroll, right? And so we are helping tens of millions of people, or the potential to help tens of millions of people better understand something that really impacts their lives. And if you think about just those two topics alone, Social Security and Medicare, especially, and I'm always fond of saying, I think you and I have talked about this in the past, based on Michael Finke's study, where he says, even irrespective of cognitive decline or Alzheimer's or dementia, your financial numeracy will decline as you age, yet your
Mm.
confidence level in your decisions will stay the same, which to me means that you're making um, you're increasingly confident about the bad financial decisions you make as you age. And that,
That's interesting. And you probably know this, that one of the colleagues, the research fellows at Alliance for Lifetime Income, Chris High, is that's his, main specialty. He's obviously conversant in every specialty, but at his level, but certainly cognitive decline and its effect on people's finances being a specialty. And just as you said, and this began, his studies were that this decline becomes, really in what is now Gen X, that peak ability is in 50s from what I remember from one of his slides, and then it starts to decline, and then kind of what I was saying at the beginning when a Medicare eligible person approaches me with their adult age child, I'm like, oh, thank goodness,
Yeah.
because now, we've got this complicated language, and then, we've got also multiple people from the same household who may be able to re-explain. So don't get into, I thought you meant X,
Yeah.
because I don't want to be obviously misunderstood in that type of thing. So,
Yeah.
all right, Bob. So spring here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Celtics just coasting here until the end. They got whooped by the Pistons, by the way. Just wanted to remind you.
Yeah, they did, but they beat the Knicks, so that's okay.
Oh, that was just yesterday, right?
Yeah, they beat the Knicks. I'm not worried about the Celtics. They'll gel
No.
when the time comes. Though the competition is strong this year, and we were lucky to get by the Indiana Pacers last year, given the injuries that they had in their roster last year. So it
They
won't be
they
easy.
look like they're just coasting. They're just like pretending, and we're just waiting till the
Yeah,
playoffs.
it's
And
the
so,
Muhammad Ali rope-a-dope strategy, maybe.
yeah,
Yeah, I
they're
think they
pro
will, but we'll see. It's that's why we play the game. That's why the Chiefs didn't win. They didn't three-peat, right?
that is very true. Still, I think the Celtics are pretty safe, or at least to the close to the very end. I think they're going to be right in it.
Yeah. I don't know on the West though. I don't know. OKC or someone else. What do you think?
I don't know. I wouldn't have traded Luca. I thought it was a joke, like that, like about 300 other other Americans. Like, okay, this is actual fake news. This is
Yeah.
actually fake.
Yeah.
This is not possibly.
So actually, before you go, since we're talking sports, and I know we could go on forever. Um, when we talk about whatever Gen Z or whatever they're called now or Alpha, um, I think there's an interesting phenomenon going on, which is many young investors are equating many of them have like DraftKings, right? On over here. And
Right.
and they're equating investing like gambling. And I feel like there's an interesting dynamic going on where people are not be, that they're becoming speculators in the market as opposed to investors in the market. And I don't know how we combat that, but it's getting people interested in investing. Whether it converts them into prudent investors or not, I don't know. But it's an interesting.
And now you've just extended our
Sorry,
broadcast
you'll
like
forgive
30
me.
minutes. No. I'm glad. I'm glad we're here. I'm glad you
You
introduced this
mentioned
topic.
sports and it triggered my
Oh
draft.
yeah, oh yeah. Because the reality is that we're going to have this long form. Now I've got a break point. This is going to be its separate standalone guy.
Okay.
Because so by DraftKings, is that the betting part, which is just the sports book part, or the daily fantasy part? They are different,
I think
right?
it's the daily betting part where I can take whatever, a prop bet on whether someone's going to sneeze at halftime or something, all right, or et cetera.
Have you ever seen so you know what daily fantasy is, right? This is where you build the team
Yeah,
and then somebody makes $1 million if they pick the team and they're assigned the fantasy points for the
yeah, yeah,
team they built.
yeah.
So, it's been one of my messages, Jay's Quarter, the newsletter, videos, everything, which is that the technology that we use in finance has been exists in other disciplines
Yeah.
all across the board, right? We talked about chess, for example, and like this problem solving. As you know, I interviewed Kevin Rabitshaw, world-class poker player who is actually a commentator right now in on the other side of the planet on Triton. And we have that here in this daily fantasy is that building a portfolio of players is
Hmm.
very similar to the efficient frontier
Yeah.
from, modern portfolio theory. It's really similar, right? Because if you think about it, under modern portfolio theory, for you gearheads who understand what that is, so this is the technology used for targeted date funds, right?
Yeah.
And every of the diversified portfolio, when you're building diversified portfolio, you're trying to get the highest expected return and reduce the variance. And you're thinking about correlations across asset classes. This
Hmm.
is the general setup. But the reality is that the solvers now exist for lineup building where you are doing the same thing, except you're increasing the correlations because you want quarterback to throw it to that wide receiver.
Mm.
So, it's your perfect example of this weird thing where you've got the very similar technology just using, but okay, somebody from daily, and then really what sticks in my the back of my neck is when like the daily fantasy professional then starts saying, "Oh, my homeowner's insurance is a scam." The numbers are a scam. What do you mean the numbers are a scam? You've just cranked out like, 75 scenario and then you right put in thoroughly the maximum number of lineups into your benefit here because you're playing probabilities, variances,
Yep.
and correlations, right? And yet the parties over here are using the same technique to talk about, the pricing of homeowners and auto insurance and other insurance. Like, oh no, this party over here, they're scamming. Yeah, it's just like unbelievable to me.
Yeah.
But
So,
anyway, like back to you then,
yeah.
the sports book. Do you think this is part of the attitude of, is this the younger persons or just across as far as,
I think it's younger people who don't have experience in investing, right there. They've entered the workforce, but they've also, since high school maybe, or since college, they've had a DraftKings account. And now they get into the workplace and, maybe the lunchtime chatter is about, oh, I just bought this penny stock or high flyer, or, oh, I just heard that, our company signed a contract with Salesforce, or I don't know, whatever it might be, right? And all of a sudden it's like, oh, let me take a little flyer on that, you know, because I
and
took
what
a
do you tell
flyer
and what
on.
do you tell them on the flyers?
Well, I tell them sort of like what the Jim Cramer approach is, right? A lot of people criticize Jim Cramer for mad money. But when you talk to Jim Cramer privately, he's like, that's the money you can afford to lose, Jay. That's
Yeah.
the retirement account. So, yeah, fine. If you want to take a flyer, but make sure that it's not your retirement account. It's the 1 or 2 or 5% of your assets that you have designated as mad money, as money to experiment with. I wouldn't
I
make
think
it.
what you just pointed out there in that last sentence, in that last passage there is vital, is that you're right that Jim Cramer gets a lot of grief because, but to be critical of him, what I would say is that I would say that he needed to say that context first,
Yeah.
more prominently,
Yeah.
because it's hilarious whenever I see them on social media or some other thing or hear something about mud balls being thrown at Jim Cramer and what he can select. I completely disagree with everything that you've just said in that criticism. That's not the basis of why I would say would be critical at all.
Yeah.
What I'm more critical of, but I am critical of the idea that you need to provide the setup first, very, very clearly. Then, therefore, all the rest of what he says makes complete sense.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? That is, which is really different because just like you just said, a flyer for 1 or 2% because it's interesting and you want to have a stake and you just don't want to just hand it over to a machine. That in the same way as, you know, 20 team parlay on on whatever, is fine, but it is way different compared to the plan overall and the fit inside the plan.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? And
Ew, yeah. You're right. It's a shame. I know he's told that to me privately. I'm sure he's
yeah,
told that to other people privately, but it's not the nature of the show to sort of like give that display.
it's a bummer. It's a bummer because and on occasion, not on that show because that show is like contained, but if you watch on when he's on another talking like Morning Call or whatever these other shows, and once in a while you'll hear this sentence saying, Well, for this audience, then continues on.
Yeah.
And I'm like, bingo.
Yeah.
That's for the audience, but who may not have understood the correct and been introduced to the context as a whole.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Which is, okay, well, now I'm just going to take the, 10 stocks that they discussed on Mad Money as buys, and that's going to be my diversified portfolio in total.
Yeah.
I'm like, how can that be? And unlike some other people out there unnamed who I will not name, right? They don't deserve the dignity of it. That may be the whole of what they know, and that's like wrong-headed.
Yeah.
That's not Jim Cramer. Jim Cramer darn well that what we just spent over the last 5 minutes,
Yeah.
he already knows. I don't need to explain to him, what modern portfolio theory is. There's like no chance
Nope.
that he doesn't know. No, no chance. But
So,
that stuff kind of to me needed the intro
yeah.
before we said, okay, within there, this slice, now we proceed with my
Yeah.
30-minute, 25 minutes of tirades,
Yeah.
buy, 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 or, or the
That's
button
how
and
we're
stuff
allocated.
like that, that kind
So,
of.
Jay, can I, because every question and every answer begets another answer or an anecdote, and I want to share one last one with you.
Okay.
So you asked about, and they all connect. You asked about my 30-year-old self. We just talked about sports. We just talked about betting. And uh and I want to tell you a story about my 30-year-old self. My former neighbor and I were very close, and we were always cooking up ideas to launch out of his garage. And one of my neighbor's claims to fame was that he had worked for Rick Pitino when he was a basketball coach at Boston University. And my neighbor was a stats genius. And he had come up with a statistical analysis of who to keep on the floor and for how long and in what game conditions. And then fast forward, Pitino leaves, my friend
Right.
graduates, Patino comes back to Boston, and my friend reconnects with him and says, "Hey, that system I built for us at Boston University, I've improved upon it." And Patino says, "Hey, that's great. Come on down, and we'll run it here for the Celtics," which he did.
Really?
He did for a period of time until the assistant coaches, who were not so fond of statistical analysis, sort of elbowed him aside. And then my neighbor and I decided to create a company that we called Optometrics. And we then went out on the road selling this system that was used by the Celtics with great success to college teams and other professional teams. And I had the opportunity to be in Jerry West's office trying to convince him to buy this statistical analysis
Wow.
system.
That is good.
And Jerry West at the time says to me, "We don't need no stinking statistical analysis. We're doing fine just the way we are with human analysis." Anyway, um, we never got the company off the ground, but it was a great pleasure to try to and we were ahead of our time in some ways because now it's sort of like,
Way, way ahead of your times. Way
standard
ahead of
operating
time.
procedure.
And,
Yeah.
and first of all, two things, Bob, about this story. Number one is, do you know who? He just goes by Harala, right? There's a huge story. He ran analytics. He was fired from the Mavericks, and he did this thing, and he became famous and very multimillionaire on betting on edges in basketball due to the things that you're talking about
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's a famous gambler and poker personality, not a professional, but which is a similar type of Nash equilibrium exercise. Anyway, so that's number one is that you are the precursor to that. That could have been you,
It could have been,
right?
and all this would be, we wouldn't even be talking now because I'd be a sports guy.
And the second thing is that we've been talking for 10 years. You've never mentioned this. I don't want to talk about retirement. I don't want to talk about Medicare or health insurance. I want to hear about more stories about this kind of thing.
Yeah,
All
well,
right.
all right. So he and I also cooked up a business of novelty goods, which include things like securitize, which would be ties that had like images of securities on them. or alphabet ties, which would have alphabets on them, or something we call fan belts, which would be belts with logos of sports teams on the belt.
The only boring story I have along that line is that one of my colleagues from my first job after business school, yeah, that one of his college classmates called him up with the business idea. Yeah, this selling books over the internet will never work. He had a shot at early stage investor. Happens to be. Oh
Story,
well.
right? Dozens of stories of that, right? Wasn't there, there's a story about one of the early Apple investors who was friends with what's his name? Wozniak? Was that his name? Who
Yeah,
sold
well, yeah.
who sold his Apple stock and
Yeah.
you know, could have been a billionaire now had he not done that. Anyway,
All right, Bob. That's Bob Powell, Retirement Daily. And tell me again, tell the listeners again the name of the podcast on
so
Yahoo.
it's decoding retirement. If you go to Yahoo finance.com, there's a little tab called videos. Click on videos, then click on all videos, and you'll find us there. Or the easier way to go is yahoofinance.com/decoding retirement.
Is the audio version up on all the different other
Oh, and
media
all the
channels?
audio version is on all the streaming platforms, Apple, Spotify, iHeart, wherever they are. Yeah, they go all over. So, and I think YouTube too, but I'm not sure. Anyway, they're there. And our goal is obviously, Jay, to have you come on too and join the wonderful list of subject matter experts that we've had so far.
I'll do that, for sure. That's a promise. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Jay.